Okay, Zok Tehillah Gemara. So we had a machlokes yesterday between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. What is the reason why we don't have kinyan kesef? Is it because midaraisa there's no such thing as kinyan kesef, which is Rish Lakish's approach, and then there's the approach of Rabbi Yochanan that also midaraisa there is kinyan kesef, but the Rabbanan were concerned. Shema yomer nifser v'achitcha b'aliyah. If I pay for something and I'm koinit, and I don't yet take delivery of it, the person who's housing it, the moicher, will not be vigilant in protecting it from harm in a fire, and therefore they said kinyan kesef shouldn't work. And we even discussed the shaila, in what way did they say kinyan kesef shouldn't work? Did they obliterate the kinyan kesef, that there's no kinyan kesef at all? Or did they say there still is a kinyan kesef, but either party has the right to back out? And then, of course, we had the sheet of Reb Shimon, who holds only the moicher has the option to back out, but that would still serve the same purpose because it would ensure, or at least induce, the moicher to protect the property. So Zog to Gemara on Mem Chesam Aleph, about 10 lines at the top, Amar Rava Kro Masnisa Misayile Rish Lakish. We're going to bring support to Rish Lakish that there's no kinyan kesef midaraisa, Saifim a pasuk and Saifim a brisa. Kra. Let's begin with the pasuk. Tichsiv, the Torah, when it speaks about Asham Gzelos, the Torah says as follows: Nefesh kisechta umal amal b'Hashem, and the Torah lists 4 ways in which someone could have violated something legabe mamanis. The kichesh b'misay, he denied to his friend that he owed him, either b'pikadon, so that's obvious, where someone is claiming that he has a pikadon, you have my watch, and you don't want to return it, and he denies, he makes a shvur that he doesn't have this fellow's watch. Oibis esumas yod. Sesumas yod is a loiva denying that he owes money. Oiba gazel, or if he stole something of somebody, you have my watch because you stole it. Oy ashak esamisai, which is referring to not paying somebody his wages. It's holding back someone's wages. Oy ashak esamisai, and then it talks about he swore on it, and after he does tshuva, he has to make some reparations. So what does the pasuk say? But notice what's conspicuously missing from here is the return of the sesumas yod. And that's what the Gemara is going to focus on. Zogt the Heilige Gemara. The Chsev v'kichesh b'misoi b'pekadon oy v'sesumas yad oy v'gazol oy oshak esamisoi. The sumas yad, what does that mean? Amar B'chista kagoyin sheyichad like kli lehalva osoi. We're talking about, the pasuk is talking about me denying that I have something of yours. If it's me denying a halva, I'm not denying that I have something of yours. I'm denying that I owe you money. But it's mashma from the pasuk that I've denied that I'm holding something that belongs to you. So therefore, Reb Chista explains the pasuk that it's discussing a case where the loiva happened to have designated a keli that he would pay from, that this is what the malva would be able to collect, and that's what he's denying. The malva says, I want that keli, and the loiva says, I don't have it. So that would be the discussion. And this opens up a whole discussion, because Rashi makes it quite clear that, and this is a big chiddush, that you're not chayiv in a shami ilois merely by denying that you owe somebody money and then swearing falsely that you don't owe somebody this money. It's only if the loiva was miyached akeli for the malva to collect from, and the malva is asking for that keli, and the loiva is denying that he has it. Only there is there going to be this Hashem Gzelos, which drastically limits the scope of it. Although there are some Rishonim who argue and said, no, even in any case where you deny Alva with the Shvua, you'll be Chayav in the Shamilas. The case is discussed in the Pasuk happens to be a case where it was Yichit Klil Alva, so that it should be similar to the other cases discussed. Thank you so much. But that doesn't mean that without that you would not have an Asham and Milas. Thank you so much. Came early enough to put up the water, but not to take it out. Thank you. Okay, what's the case of Oshak Esamisoi? He didn't pay. That's also like Alva. Amar Chista, it's the same thing. Going to Yichid Loi Kli Lashkoi. The Bailam, the owner, the employer, was Mayachar Keli. And again, as Rashi says, but not all Rishonim hold like that, the Eloi Loi Mechayev Kvir Schar Sacher Carbon Shvua. Just for denying that you owe money, you would not be Mechayev Carbon Shvua. It's only if there was a chayfetz that we're discussing that you're denying that you have. Okay? Now let's talk about when the pasuk discusses returning these gzelos or these violations. So it talks about gzela. It talks about this keli that you deny having, that you're supposed to be paying your employees with, or a shomer denying that it has to be cotton. The Torah doesn't mention anything about making amends on the Teshumas Yad. Why not? My time. I'll tell you what the answer is. Lav mishum de mechser meshicha. You know what probably happened? He's not mechuyev to give it back. You know the loiva is not mechuyev to give it back to the malva, because even though the loiva said, yes, this is what I'm paying you with, maybe it's speaking where the malva never made a kinyan on it. And Reish Lakish holds that unless the malva makes a kinyan on it, he's not going to be kinyan just because there's money owing for it, which was what kinyan kesef would be, and therefore you have a raya from the pasuk. The Balta pasuk doesn't talk about returning it. The pasuk must be speaking in a case where there was no mashicha, and therefore the malva was never kinyan. And this is proof that the Torah agrees with that principle. And the Torah is saying that Mashiach is koina, but Kesef is not koina. Amalei Rav Papa Rav. So Rav Papa told Rav, I don't see why this is such a big raya, because Ema may Oishek who the Hadar. Oishek is very similar to the case of Halva. What's the difference if I owe you money because you worked for me, or if I owe you money because I borrowed money from you? It's the same type of chiyuv. So once the Torah says you return to Oishek, and how do we explain it? We explain it where you're Mayachar Keli for the employee, and now you're denying it, so that we can apply the same configuration to the Teshumas Yad. Zokt Rashi, my Oishek the Hadrikra, the Kivan the Hadrikra Oishek, the Mechasin Nami Mashicha. There, it would be a parallel case where there was no Mashicha made. Therefore, Lo Itzrich L'Haduri L'Teshumas Yad. Fakert by Oishika works, so by Oishika works, and there was also no Mashicha. So you see, maybe Kinyan Kesef is koina, and maybe the reason why the Torah didn't mention specifically Sesumas Yad is because the Torah knows that you could just compare it to Oishik. You can ask me, what about the other things? Why could learn Pekadon from Gezel? I don't know. There must be separate reasons for that. So Zok to Gemara, Hacha b'may askinon. Maybe you could say that the whole thing is not a raya anyway, because by Oishek, you know why? There is no issue. A kinyan is going to not let me menu the chazor v'afkida. Maybe it's speaking by Oishek where the employer had already given the item that he was going to pay with to the employee, and he's paid off already. And after that, the employee asked the owner to watch it for him. Frek the Gemara, Hainu Pekadon. That's the same thing as Pekadon. Like, what's the difference how this fellow originally acquired this Pekadon? It's a regular case of Pekadon. So that doesn't make sense to say. So no, maybe Trey gave the Pekadon. Maybe there's two types of Pekadon. So Mela, you don't have a raya to anything anymore. Okay. Zog to Gemara. If you're going to explain away Oishak that way, the Sumas Yad Nami Lihadre, you could learn that you also gave it back. Velukme and say, Kigoin should not lehemenu, because you could have done the same thing. Zog to Gemara, if the pasuk would have specifically mentioned the return of the item that you had in your possession because you paid a chayv with it, and now the malva gave it back to you to watch, if that would have been the case, similar to Oishak, then loy tuyufta v'loy sayata. Then we wouldn't learn anything from this pasuk, because you could learn that the case was where he made a meshicha, or you could learn, and that would go according to Rish Lakish. You could learn the case where there was no meshicha, and it's working with King Kesef because Rabbi Yochanan. We don't know anything. We wouldn't know anything of the pasuk. But now that the pasuk did something that's shtickle of an anomaly, now that the pasuk did put Oishek and discussed return, but when it discussed Sasumas Yad, it didn't discuss return, so it made a distinction between Sasumas Yad and Oishek. It would be a raya. Why? Zotrashi. Since the Torah says, by Oishek, you do give it back, upikadon, the gezel v'aveda, every other case, the Torah discusses returning, and the only case that the Torah omits is v'lo yahadri l'shumas yad. Why is that? It must be the Torah trying to tell us that there's a difference over here. Ikalamela tesumas yad is b'mechosar mashicha, the Oishek is keshuvim al-shach. We'll say, why did the Torah make a distinction? Really, Oishek should be the same as the Sumas Yad. Why did the Torah make a distinction? It must be to tell us that Oishek in the Torah, the reason why there's a Chiv Asham Gzeilos is because, in fact, there was a Mashiach involved. And only Mashiach is Kodim in the Torah. And to Sumas Yad speaking, there was no Mashiach involved, and that's why there's Lo Yahadre, because there's no Asham Elois when, or the Torah is at least not speaking about a case where you have to give it back because he was never Kodim in the first place. So, therefore, the Gemara believes that we have a shtickle raya to Rish Lakish, because from the fact that the Torah talked about putting Oishuk back, not the Sumas Yad, we have to ponder, why is that? Probably the Torah is trying to tell us there's a difference in the cases. One has a Mashiach, one doesn't have a Mashiach. Gavaltic. That is the Kra. That is the Kra that teaches us. In fact, Gemara, how could you say that that's Pshat in the Pasuk? Sumas Yad lo yahadra Kra. Are you going to tell me that this case of Sasumas Yad in this pasuk is different from all the other violations, and only Sasumas Yad was different and it wasn't given back? But Tanya, we learned that whatever applies to one item in this pasuk applies to all. Because Amar Rab Shimon, Minayin litin isa Amar Lamaila Lamata. How do we know that whatever is discussed in the first pasuk about the violations applies equally to the Hashava? Everything is one case. They're all similar. So we have a limud. We have a limud telling us that in fact by Sumas Yad there was also Ishavan, and that means either like Rabbi Yochanan, either the Kini Kesef was enough, or it must mean that he gave it to him and took it back. But I'll call upon him, you no longer have your raya. Zok Gemara, a huge chiddush. The head yomia loy ahadrekra. Yes, the Torah definitely doesn't. The Torah definitely includes Sumas Yad as well because of that. But not all halachas in the Torah are created equal. There's still a distinction. It's only learned out of a limud. It's not mafurish in the pasuk, and we still could learn from the fact that something's not mafurish in the pasuk. We could still learn from that fact this halacha that Kinyan Kesef is not kohen. And it's not the only time in Shas that you find something like this, where there's a difference between something that you learn. There's a difference between something that you learn out of a limud, even though it's a deraisa, and between something that's a deraisa but that's stated in the portion of the Torah. That is the chiddush of our Gemara here. That there's a distinction, even though they're both halachas deraisa. Nevertheless, there's still a difference between if it's mentioned beferish in the Torah versus if we only learn it from a limud. So that is the pasuk that supports Rish Lakish's shita that there is no kinyan kesef midaraisa. Masnisa. And what is the brisa that supports Rish Lakish's shita? Minola. The Tanya we learned. Nos nola balon. A balon is someone who operates a merchatz. And we're talking about a gizbar, somebody who has, not necessarily a gizbar, but somebody who has mammon hektish. If you give the money to the balon, you're moil, because now you remoitzi the money from the rishus of hektish. Now it's interesting because a moment ago we learned that you give the guy an empty nugget of copper at the real estate. You give the guy something else, but I guess that's just as a placeholder. That's your soda ticket. This is how you bought the soda ticket in the first place. So nosna lebalon mal. The Omar Rav commented on this. Davka balon who the mechasher mashicha. It's only a balon where there is no product to make a mashicha on. There, the kesef will create the transaction. Because if the kesef makes no transaction at all, why would you be moil? Doesn't do anything. If kinyan kesef doesn't work. So here, kinyan kesef works. But kinyan kesef works because there is nothing that you could have made a mashicha on. You're purchasing a service or you're renting space in the balon, but there's no object that you could possibly make mashicha on. Avamidi achrita, the mechser mashicha. But if you were buying anything else with kesef, that there is something upon which to make mashicha, which is required, then loy mal adamashach. Then you wouldn't be moil until you made the mashicha, and that created the kinyan. So you have a raya from here that if you're not moil until you make a mashicha, clearly that's a deraisa. Because if really you're mikra din your koina, the midrabanan they say you're not koina, you should be moil, right? Because they're not going to be mekel on you, they're going to be machmer on you. I'm sorry. I hear. So Zok to Gemara, Nosna lepruta shal Zok Rashi, Nosna lepruta shal hakdish b'shoygig lebalon b'schar sheyir chatzenu b'veis hamerchatz. To me, this sounds more like I'm paying him. He's gonna scrub it up me, right? It doesn't say I'm using the beis hamerchatz. Sheyir chatzenu. Yirchatzenu means he's gonna rub me, right? I always say over a story with a good friend of mine. Today's a chashav. So, but he's a very finicky English guy. He said, I once went into a Chassidish mikveh, and I hear a guy there sitting there on the bench, kerachting, Ingeman, give me the head. So I just thought he wanted something. So he said, I fled, and I never came back. That's why he doesn't go to the mikveh anymore, because nobody asked him to scratch his back. So Zok to Gemara, so you see from here that Mashicha is koine midaraisa and not kesef. Lebalam b'schashin tzchayis merchatz moav avli shadayin lerachatz. He didn't do the rechitza yet. Why? Because there was already a chiyuv made by the paying of kesef, and Rav said dafka balon katani demol anoisen mishum deschiris gemurahi b'nesinas apruta. The transaction is completed merely by paying. Ve'ein yochalach seboy. Since there is nothing to make a mashiach on, that is binding. But if you're paying money for something you could make a mashiach on, you would not be moil until you were mashiach. But that's not true, because Vatanya nosna l'saper. What if you gave money to a barber? Moal, there you're moil, even though you didn't make a mashiach. But by a barber, there is what to make a mashiach on. Visaper haboy lememshach taspires. I guess the minig was you went to the barber and before you paid him and you made a kinyan on his scissors, and that now seals the deal to purchase his barber services. So in fact, over here you see that kesef is koine even though there is what to make a mashiach on. So it's more the case of sapor hacha b'mayaskinon. We're talking about a goy, and a goy does not have kinyan mashicha. Since a yid has kinyan mashicha, a goy does not have kinyan mashicha. Lavar mashicha. We actually have support to make this distinction between a yid and a goy, because we have another brisa that contradicts the brisa we just quoted. Not l'saper, or l'saper, and saper is a shipper. Literally, he operates a delivery service using a ship, so it's a service. Or to any other service, loy mal, you're not moil ad mashach until you make a mashicha on some item that's related to this trade. The question is, we have a brisa a moment ago that said nosnos haper mal, and now we just quoted a brisa nosnos haper loy mal. Kashin adodi to steer in the brises. Elav shamina kan besaper nochri. The brisa that says mal, speaking by saper nochri, does not have kinyan mashicha. Kan besaper Yisrael, who has a kinyan mashicha shema amina. So now we have our raya from a brisa to Reish Lakish that mashicha is not koina at all with a raisa. V'chein Omer Rab Nachman disagrees with Reish Lakish. Rab Nachman knows like Rabbi Yochanan that really mois is koina with a raisa. The varta mois koinois ubotka Levi b'snisei b'yashka. And Levi found a different brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan. In fact, that there is kinyan kesef midaraisa. What does it say? The brisa nosno l'sitain. A sitain would be a distributor of food products, and he provides store owners with product. Now, the store owners can't afford to pay for all the product that they're going to use throughout the season up front. So what they'll do is they'll give him like a shekel deposit. He'll give them a lot of food, and then as they sell it, they'll pay him, right? That's why most retailers need credit terms from their suppliers, because where do they get the money from to pay their suppliers? By selling their product. So nosno siton, you have a store owner that paid the siton, but by mistake, not realizing it, he used moment of hektish, mohus moil right away. How can it be moil right away? He didn't make a mashiach on the payers. He just paid for them. Ella, turning on to Amud Beis, Kashal Reish Lakish, you have a very good raya to Rabbi Yochanan that in fact kesef is koina. How is Reish Lakish going to deal with this brisa? Reish Lakish, Hamani Rab Shimoni, that brisa could go according to Rab Shimon. Even Reish Lakish agreed. Remember, Rab Shimon said the moicha could be chayzer, but lekech can't be chayzer, right? Why? Because Rab Shimon learns that for sure kinyan kesef is koina midaraisa, and it's only midrabanan that it's not koina. That brisa could be going according to Rab Shimon. Okay, gewaltig. Now, this really opens up an interesting shiloh that's in Yonah D'Yom, because there's a discussion in Tosfos, and I think I touched on it yesterday, and the Gemara seems to make an assumption that a kinyan that works for a Yid doesn't work for a goy, right? If the Mashicha is required for the Yid, by a goy saper, you don't need the Mashicha, because by a goy there is no kinyan Mashicha, right? Kesef will work. There's a shita who holds, and Tosfos disagrees with that, but there's a shita who holds that on the opposite. If according to Rabbi Yochanan, where kinyan kesef is koina for a Yid, then only Mashiach is koina for a goy. It's exactly the opposite. Now, the goy and a Yid don't have the same kinyanim, but we also now have a machlokes what kinyanim work for a goy. So where is this relevant? It's relevant when the Rav is selling the chametz to a goy. What kinyan is he supposed to use? So the Mishnah Berurah brings down that the Rav has to use multiple kinyanim, because there's so many different shitas as to which kinyanim work for a goy. He has to use Mashicha and Hagbah and Kesef. He has to use everything to cover all the bases, no matter what kinyan you hold applies to a goy, that we should have that kinyan. So that's mamish built out of our Gemara, how mechiras chometz has to be done. Okay, we're going to proceed to the next chelik of the Mishnah. Even though a kinyan isn't chal, because kesef isn't koina, whether it's a raisa, whether it's a rabbanon, but if you do back out of a deal after you already accepted payment or after you already paid, I will amr mishapar. It's by that Gemara. Abai Amar, you don't actually go and curse the guy. You just tell me, by the way, when you back out, it's not such a good thing. It could lead to terrible zach. Rav Amar said, no, you son of a, you jerk, you lowlife, you're going to suffer all these horrible consequences that the Torah said. So we actually do curse him. Abai Amar, you know why we don't curse him out? We just tell him that this is not a good idea for him. You're not allowed to curse out a member of Klal Yisrael. Rav Amar, I'm sorry. I think we know anybody could be a Nazir. Rav Amar, Melat Latinula, we could curse him out. Now we know that someone who's not Oisam Samcha, you have to speak Lashon Hara about, right? So this guy, all he did was he backed out of a deal that he legally had to back out of. So why is he Eino Yosy Mais Amcha? So Tosfos clarifies, very important. So one liner, Yosy Mais Amcha, Loi Mikri Hai Eino Yosy Mais Amcha Lein Shiyei Muter Lakal Loi Bechina. Avada, this Eino Yosy Mais Amcha that he is violating, it doesn't make him into a low life, like he's not showing Torah mitzvahs that you can do anything you want. This is a subtle version of it. In this respect, he's not Osamais Amcho, so you can give him the Mishapora that he's entitled to. But Avadi is not a complete write-off. He still gets the lease and shul. Okay, how do I know that you could mamish curse him out? The Reb Chia bar Yosef, Yahava Lezuzei Amilcha. Reb Chia bar Yosef was a salt merchant, and he received a deposit. He received money to pay for salt. And at that point, let's say the salt was $100 a ton. But at the time the guy wanted to come pick it up, it went up to $150 a ton. And Reb Chia bar Yosef didn't want to give him the salt. You make a deposit of $100, and now you're going to take all the salt, and you can make so much money without even laying out a penny. So he didn't want to release the salt. Also, the Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, Reb Chia bar Yosef went to ask Rabbi Yochanan, the Shaila, must I give him all the salt? Amalei Rabbi Yochanan told him, you better. Zil Havlu. You better give him all the salt. The Eloi, if not, Kabil Alecha Mishafara. You're going to have to accept on yourself a curse. Do you want that? Zok Rava, if you're going to tell me Abaye that all we tell him is you should know it's not good for your health, the Amrit I do Medinale, Reb Chia bar Yosef, Bar Ideal. What do you think Reb Chia bar Yosef needed Rabbi Yochanan to tell us this halacha b'shapar? Of course you knew that. So for Gemara, and if you don't like Rav, it's any better. Velamai mail it latinalei. Reb Chia bar Yosef Osi lekabuli alei latusa derabanan. You think Reb Chia bar Abba wanted to go receive a curse? So something doesn't stem over here. Ella, what must have happened and unfortunately, I didn't explain it properly. I said that he only received the deposit. In the Havmi the Gemara, he received payment in full. He received payment in full, and he wanted to back out. Now the Gemara is introducing Reb Chia bar Yosef a Ravain Hu de Yahavle. He only received a deposit, and therefore, whosoever Reb Chia bar Yosef held kinegda hu koina. You might know if you're sure not koina because we know kinyan kesef is not koina, but we're talking about legabe the mishapora. He held even the mishapora I'm only going to get if I withhold kineged the money that you gave me, but kineged the money that you didn't give me. Why can't I withhold that? The Misha Para should not apply to that. And Rabbi Yochanan told him, I'm sorry. Even though he only made a deposit, you are mechuyev to give him everything, and the Misha Para would still apply. Itmar. So now that we've discussed this Eravine business, we're going to delve into a little bit more into what is the status of an Eravine, and we're going to find out that Reb Chia bar Yosef, he would have asked a different Rav, he would have got a different psak. But he asked Reb Yochanan, who made him give over the whole thing. Itmar, a Ravine. Rav Amar Kinegdei Hu Koina. So had he went to Rav, he would not have had to give away the salt, because Rav holds you only Koina Kineged what your down payment is. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kineged Kula Hi Koina. That down payment makes you be Koina everything. And again, it's not a real Kinyan. This is just Lagabe, the Misha Para. So he asked Rabbi Yochanan, had he asked Rav, he wouldn't have had to give them up. Metzia. We're going to ask Akash. Now this Eravine, Rashi says quite clearly, is not a down payment. What it is it's like a mashkin. So it's not a down payment at all. It was more like a gamble. The Omer Loy, the buyer told the seller, here's a mashkin that I'm going to go through with the deal. If I don't go through with the deal, you can keep the whole Eravine. So see, this is not a question of down payment. This is like a gamble, like a bet. And the Moicha said, okay, if I'm going to back out, I'll give you double. The halach is neskaimu hatnoim. They each have to stick to their end of the bargain, depending on what occurred at the end. Divrei Rabbi Yosy. Zoktim Rabbi Yosy lotamei the Amar esmachto kanya. Rabbi Yosy is going lotamei the other smachta kanya. Of course, it's opened up a whole new sukkah about gambling. Gambling is also the smachta. It's making a commitment based on a future event that's out of your hands, and that's called stealing. If you're the smachta lekanya, kula alma moida for moist tzedakah a smachta kanya, and there's no problem there. And kula alma moida that you're allowed to buy a lottery ticket. Because when you buy a lottery ticket, you're not making a bet, you're making an investment. You're buying a piece of paper that might go up in value. It's no different than buying a property. If it's a good investment or not, that's a different shaila. But that's not halachic shaila. Zok Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda has a different opinion over here. And he says, Dayoy sheyikne keneged arvoin. Even though this was like a gamble, nevertheless, he will be kind of the product that he wanted to buy, keneged the value of his Eruv. And Rabbi Shimon made a comment on Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Hamed Devar Mamur. Under what circumstances did Rabbi Yehuda say that Einay Koina Ela Keneged Ervoinai? Is man Sha'amaloi Ervoini Yikoin. When he said, I want my Eruvin to be kind of the whole thing. And that's nonsense. That would never ever work. As Rashi says. Is man Sha'amaloi Ervoini Yikoin Yikna. If he says it should be kind of everything. It's not a down payment. He wants to be konya the whole lot with this Eruv. So Mati so why is it? That's exactly why it doesn't work. Valav Milsi, that's nonsense. Why in the world should this Eruv be konya everything? He wanted to create a fantasy. That fantasy will not work. But what if I sell you a house or a soda for 1,000 zuz? And you made a down payment. That is kind of the whole thing. Kana u'machzer lo yisashar. I feel like a kamashana. That's a VTB. I'm kind of for $500 in full, and now I owe you the rest of the money. So Zok Gemara, this was a case of karka. Maila who had in lamatalpin. The same way by karka, where we say that this is a good kinyan kesef, and it's actually chal and it's binding. Let's say in a parallel case. When we're talking about metaltlin, even though they're the kinyan, it's not really a kinyan that's binding, but it's a kinyan lagabe creating a mishapara, we should say the same thing. If you make a down payment, it should be mechayiv you everything, and it should be a mishapara and everything, which would be a raya to Rabbi Yochanan. And let's say that b'distama kani lekulu. If you make a partial payment, a down payment, just like by karka, you're kinyan mamish with a kinyan kesef dairaisa. So too, when the kinyan kesef only creates a mishapara, the mishapara should be on everything. Zok Gemara lo, you don't have a raya. Metaltlin b'destama loikan. By metaltlin, the kinyan kesef will not create a mishapara on the whole lot. It'll only make a mishapara keneged what you paid for. Why should there be a difference? Zok Gemara, very simple. Karka de bekas b'kani lei mamish. Karka, which kesef does a real kinyan, kani lei lekula. We'll say it's also kinyan a whole lot. Metaltlin loikani ela lekabula mishapara. Metaltlin, no kinyan. It's just a down payment triggers a mishapara. Therefore, loikani lekule will say it's not even effective enough to create some type of binding agreement. For the rest, it's only a binding agreement legabe mishapara legabe what you paid for. Okay, gavaltik. So there's our machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, whether or not making a down payment, making a kinyan kesef is binding on the whole lot. Let's actually suggest that whether or not you get a mishapara on the whole thing, if you only made a down payment, let's say that's a machlokes tonight. Hamalvas chaveri ala mashkin. Someone lends his friend money and he has a mashkin. So normally we know that shmita is mishamit and he chayvis. But if you have a mashkin on the chayv, shmita is not mishamit. You know why? Because I no longer, it says shmoit kol bal masha yoda. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to go approach your friend to collect on a loan. If you have a mashkin, he's going to come to you. So therefore, if you have a mashkin, shmita is not mishamit. Zokt the brisa, the mashkin does not have to be the full value of the entire loan. Even though the mashkin is only worth half of the loan, it will not be mishamit the chayv. Now, does that mean it won't be mishamit the whole chayv? Does that mean it won't be mishamit neged the mashkin? We will shortly see. If the mashkin was keneged the full alva, then ain't no mishamit. The malav it will be mishamit. So, Frank the Gemara, what exactly does Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel mean when he says ain't no mishamit? My ain't no mishamit to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Ilan my kenegdai. If you're going to tell me even Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who holds that the mashkin protects you from shmita, but it only protects you keneged the value of the mashkin. Michlal de Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Savar Lach Paganami Misham. That means if Rabbi Yehuda argues, he's going to have to say that it won't even protect you for that half that the mashkin covered. And that doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Because why in heaven do you have a mashkin? El mashkin, the knockout going on Tamar Aleph, Lomerle. The whole purpose of the mashkin here was to try to have him save himself from Shemitah, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't do anything. So why was the Bechlam mashkin? Elav Shema Minei must be that my Einim is Shamed Amar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. When Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says if you have a mashkin that's only worth part of the value of the chayiv, it's Einim Shamed Pekuloi. Through that mashkin, you're sort of being toifus in the entire chayiv. Similar to what we're saying here in Rabbi Yochanan, that the Kidin Kesef, even though it's only down payment, it's kind of the whole lot. So to over here, the mashkin on the partial value is toifus al chayiv. Umayim wants to mishresh. Umayim is shamed to come. Rabbi Yosy is lahach palga the loy nochad the mashkin. Uval kamivli. This is precisely what the mochalikus is. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel saver connected kulay ukain. Rabbi Yosy saver connected ukaina. And you have a right to the machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Zakmar loy. You don't have to say that at all. My einam is shamed to come. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Maybe all Rabbi Shimon Gamliel meant is einam is shamed lahach palga the nochad the mashkin. Meaning, you're not cutting the whole thing. You're only cutting the connected the mashkin. So then you can ask, why did Rabbi Yehuda need a mashkin for? Just to remind the guy that he owes the money. He's out of mashkin. But Avada, he's not konyer. So what you asking?
Before you're saying the reason the mashkin was because of Shmita, when I say the reason the mashkin was because of the mashkin, the security of the loan, nothing to do with Shmita.
Which is what the Gemara says at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the other issue here is, there's a very interesting shiloh here. Do we have a machlokes between, at least the Gemara is trying to suggest, but the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is if the mashkin sort of grasps the whole. So this isn't exactly whether a down payment is binding on the whole lot, but it's a similar concept that when I'm holding a mashkin, I'm really holding on to the whole chayv already. So because of that, I don't have a problem that I'm collecting on it. So according to Rabbi Yehuda Anosi, I'm allowed to mon half the chayv, right? Because for sure my mashkin doesn't have the chayv. What would the halacha be if the guy says, I want my mashkin back? Here's half the chayv. So let's say he owes him $100,000. The mashkin is worth is $50,000. The guy's holding on to the mashkin according to Rabbi Yehuda, and the loyvet goes to the malva and says, here's $50,000. I want my mashkin back. And the malva says, no. Until you pay me in full, I'm not giving you your mashkin back. So the Tzais HaChoshen says, everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda holds, that you have a right to hold on to that mashkin until he pays you in full. The machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is if I'm going to the loiva, I want you to pay me. You better pay me. I have a mashkin. So there I can only force him to pay half, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But if he wants the mashkin back, I do have a right to withhold the mashkin until I'm paid in full. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Rav Kahana, Yahavu Lezuzay Akisna. Rav Kahana was selling flax, and someone paid him for the flax. And what happened is there wasn't payment in full. No one up. So he had the same shaila. But he didn't go to Rabbi Yochanan. He already learned from Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Who was it? Yeah, who was it earlier? Was it Rabbi Chia bar Abba? It was Rabbi Chia bar Yosy. He learned from Rabbi Chia bar Yosy, I'm not going to Rabbi Yochanan. Also, look at the Rav. He went to Rav. Amrlei. B'mai the Nakitas Zuzay Havlahu. You only have to give him keneged what you accepted payment for. But the idich devarim ninu. They're merely devarim. It was merely a verbal commitment. Udevarim ein ben mishum mechusar amana. There's no mechusar amana for devarim. Even though we learned on Mamchas and Aleph about the brisa by devarim ein ruach chachamim noichei menu. Here, Rav told him, you don't even have the problem of ein ruach chachamim noichei. So let's have a look. V'idach dvarim ninu b'loy mois Rav l'tamei da'amar kenegdei ukaina. But you don't even have the issue of ein ruach chacham noichei. And the reason for it is because here there's a very compelling reason. When there's a lot of money involved and there's a compelling reason, you don't have the concept of ein ruach chacham noichei menu. You only have the concept of ein ruach chacham noichei menu if it was not such a serious reason. The Itmar we learned, Devar, Rav Amar ein bahem mishum mechusrei amana. If you don't fulfill your words, you're not considered mechusrei amana to be considered someone she'ein ruach hachamim noichi men. Rabbi Yochanan Amar yesh b'm mechusar emana. Even if it's only words, there's still a problem with mechusar emana. We know Rabbi Yochanan knows that you have to give the whole thing. Metzia Rabbi Yosy Rabbi Yehuda. Metzia Rabbi Yosy Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Ma Talmud Loimer. It says in the pasuk Hin Tzedek. So the pasuk lists off all the different type of measurements that you have to make sure are correct measurements. Moiznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, efa tzedek, hin tzedek yilachem, and yishem lakech. The problem is once the Torah tells us about one volume that has to be right, then all the volumes have to be right because they're all totally in each other. So why did the Torah have to list off hin tzedek, hin bechalal efa haya? When the Torah said you have to have an efa tzedek, we already know that the hin has to be tzedek. So why did the Torah list off hin specifically? The loy malach it's a drasha. Your yeses, your commitment should be stuck to, and your no's should be stuck to. So basically, there is a problem of mechusar emana when you go back on your word. Zogt Rashi, Elish yehein shalach, kloimer kashatem adaber hein oilav. When you say yes or no, kaim dvarecha, make sure to fulfill your words. V'hatsteik oisam, and make your words righteous. So Oibazoi, it's shver on Rav who says that you don't have to stick to this. Amar Abaye, you don't learn that from the pasuk, that you could never back out on the word, even if there's a compelling reason. What we learn from Hein Tzedek is ahu shelo yadaber echad b'peh ve'echad b'leiv. Rashi learns what this means is v'shashu oimer adiver lo yeh b'dai l'shamis. When you say something, don't have in mind to be cheating. So avada, if you had in mind to do it, but the circumstances changed, that's not a problem. But if you never intended to keep your word, that's where there'll be a problem. Since there was a compelling reason, that's not mechusar emana. Only if you never intended to keep your word. Now there are those who learn that this is, the Rambam actually elaborates on this and says this is referring to not only Dina Mominus. From here it's mashma, we're talking about Dina Mominus. But the Rambam says it applies to everything. A person is not allowed to lie. And not only can't you lie with actually articulating a lie by saying something, even if you're winking or pointing, any communication that's not true would be covered by this, would be also. Metzia Zot Gemara. Rab Shimon Omer.
Proof for that? That you have to keep your word.
Rab Shimon Omer, Av Api, Sha'amru, Talis Kaina, Dinner Zov. Even though in our Mishnah we said that metaltlin is Kaina Dinner Zov, because you can make, when you make Mashiach on the beged, on the product, you're mechuyev the currency. Yet vein Dinner Zov Kaina Talis, but the kesef, the currency is not Kaina the item. Mikol Makayim Kachalach. That's taka true that there's no kinyan. Aval Amru Misha Para Mayanchidar Mabel Mayanchidar Floga who asid Lipara Mimisha Enoy Oymed B'Diburay. So the problem is it's shver because here it says beferish that there is going to be a problem if you back out. Zakt Gemara Tanai. In fact, it's a machloikas Tanaim whether or not this applies to the whole thing. It's not be learned. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nasya told his children, "Say go hire for me some employees. You're going to be my HR representative." So what did he do? He told them, not only am I going to pay you, we're providing lunch. Our company provides lunch, free lunches. And then he came back to his father to tell him the details of the deal that he worked out with these employees. His father told him, that's not a good deal you made. Because if you're mechayiv yourself in general, mezoinis, to a ben Avram Avinu, afilu v'ata oisolem kesuda shloime b'shaitoi lo yotzes yidei chayvascha imoyem shem b'nei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov. These are, every Jew is a malchus. So you think you're going to give him sandwiches and you're going to be yotzer? You're putting us into an impossible position of liability. Ella, ad shelo yaschilu b'malacha, before they start working, which at that point the contract is sealed, say them or lehem, go tell them I'm changing the terms of the agreement. It's almanash ein lochem alai alapas v'kitni is blavad. It's I'm only giving you a sandwich, a tuna sandwich for lunch. And that's it. If you hold once you make a verbal commitment, even though it's not koina. there's a problem of backing out because of the chusrei mana. Heichi amar le zil haderbach. How could Rabbi Yochanan ben Masya have told his children to back out? Elamai, you have a raya from here that, in fact, forum ein b'm shum chusrei mana. So it's the raya. Because shiny also the poilim gufayu l'sham chadaytayu. The poilim never really perceived that commitment as a commitment. My timer made the yadi the alavu asam. They know that any deal that the child is making with them is subject to approval by the father. So therefore, there the father could back out because the deal wasn't even sealed even verbally until the father would ratify. So I would say, why did the Rebbe say hurry up before they start the malacha? After they start the malacha, the terms are still not defined until it's confirmed by the father. So at that point, the expectation is that the deal is sealed. Why? Amri will say it must be if he already allowed us to start working based on this agreement. Meimar Amar Kamei Davua. He must have already told his father what the terms were. V'nichale. And the father was happy with it. Okay, we'll stop here. So now we have a machlokes if you could back out due to a compelling reason or not. According to Rav, you could, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, you cannot.